What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to unit number 4, part 2, which is part of this, what we referred to in unit 1 as kind of this Eurocentric age of exploration, but really it's this interconnection of more trade routes. And this is kind of a follow-up to the first one. So in this period of 1450 to 1750, we have new trade routes. We have greater interaction between the Afro-Eurasian trade routes. We also have this incorporation of the Americas in. We have mercantilism, joint stock companies. We have Europeans kind of cutting out the middleman and going straight to Asia, South Asia, and East Asia to get these goods and bring them back to their markets in Europe and other places in Asia. So this part 2 is really how social class structures change as a result of all of this economic activity and political activity that's going on in the world. So let's kind of jump into it. First thing, as kind of a side note to this, which doesn't really bring up the trade necessarily, is from 1300 to 1800, we have this period called the Little Ice Age, where all around the world, the global mean temperature drops significantly. So just want to kind of point out to you this chart here. This is the kind of average global temperature. Anything above it is warm, anything below it is cold. And check out how significantly the temperature kind of drops here around the 1500s. From here, and then again down here into the 1600s, how significantly it drops. If you ever look at artwork from Europe, especially Northern Europe, Britain, France, Germany, from this time period, like towards the end of the Renaissance, you see a lot of this artwork that shows this freezing of rivers and just this depressing winters that look like they go on. And that's the reality of the time. These winters were harsh in the 16 and 1700s. And as a result of this, we really have these changes in agricultural practices. So things that you might be able to grow before from a longer growing season and where it was warmer, maybe into October and early November, you can't grow anymore because the winter comes on so fast. Winter is coming. And since winter is coming, we have to kind of change some of our agricultural practices. Luckily for the Northern Europeans, they have access to some of these new products coming from the Columbian Exchange, like the potato, which is easier to grow in these climates. Also, because of these cold winters, the settlements in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe and parts of West Africa, are going to shrink a little bit. So we're going to have this contraction of settlements. Historians and geologists and environmental scientists are still trying to figure out exactly why. And it's one of those topics that is still being written about today, about why this little ice age happened. There's really two theories. The bigger theory right now that's really prominent is that volcanic activity, which influences our climate patterns, caused this to happen. So there were a lot of volcanic eruptions around 1300, and it led to this decrease in temperature. The other theory is that because of the decline of population, both from the Mongol invasions and from the Black Death, we had less CO2, which led to just a change in weather pattern. So just kind of a side note, interesting thing. Also, the second kind of point of this is we do have traditional peasant agriculture is going to increase and it's going to change. There are areas around the world that are now going to really be influenced by this trade, and they realize that they can produce more goods that are desirable. So for example, down here in India produces textiles, aka cotton, which comes back to the Southernization article from a couple weeks ago. And because they're producing so much cotton, because they produce cotton and the Europeans are here to trade with this cotton, more peasants are going to start growing cotton. So we're going to see this increase in labor activity amongst peasants, where peasants are going to be expected to produce more cotton and to bring that cotton to market to trade with the Europeans, so that more revenue and more economic activity comes into this area of South Asia, into India. Also, obviously, we have slavery in Africa and slavery in the Americas. I just want to focus on the Africa piece for a second. Slavery in Africa has continued and existed from 600 to 1450. It existed within the Muslim Empire, and generally Muslim and the caliphates would get slaves from here in Africa and bring them up into the caliphate. The slaves that were enslaved in the Muslim caliphate were non-Muslims. It was illegal to enslave another Muslim. And the slavery that existed from 600 to 1450 was really much better than what we saw or what we see in the Americas, this kind of harsh labor conditions where whipping and beating and hangings and horrible things took place. The slavery in the Muslim Empire was a little better. And most slaves, even into this period of 1450 to 1750, that are brought up into these areas in the Middle East from Africa, are generally going to be household slaves, and they're not going to be farm hands, for example, like we see the slavery in the Americas. They're going to be much more used as domestic slaves. So cooking, cleaning, helping take care of the children, doing domestic chores. This is going to have an impact on the loss of population, just like we see in West Africa, which we'll talk about in a second, where a lot of this population ends up in the Middle East and the Mediterranean. So it's going to have an impact on these regions when you lose population. Also, kind of talked about this already, but just want a quick review. We are going to have this plantation economy in the Americas, growing sugar, cotton, tobacco, which are very labor intensive, and you need a large number of workers for it. And we're going to see a lot of slaves who are going to be transported, 10 to 20 million estimates, from West Africa to the Americas. And this is our sugar cane, and this is what it looks like, where you have to chop it down, harvest it, peel it. Also cotton, so you have people picking cotton, which is going to be highly labor intensive as well. So we're going to see slaves brought to the Americas. We're also going to see slaves brought into the Mediterranean. Also in the Americas, especially Spanish Latin America. So when I say Spanish Latin America, I'm referring to this area that was controlled by Spain and the Spanish Empire. Always remember, if you want to know which country controlled it during this time period, just think of what language people speak in each of these regions. And one thing the Spanish are going to do is they're going to reuse or continue to use the Encomienda system, but they're going to make it much harsher. Where with the Meda system in the Inca Empire, you would have, from 600 to 1450, you would have been working for the betterment of your town by building a road or building a house. This Meda system that the Spanish implement, you're going to have to work for a certain period of time, just like in the Inca. But the main difference with this Meda system is it's harsh. You are not working for the betterment of your community. You are working for the betterment of the Spanish crown. And you are going to be forced to mine silver. And mining of silver is a horrendously awful prospect. It's horrible to do. The Spanish don't have enough labor to do it themselves, so they're going to force the Inca to do it. If they don't do it, you can see a picture here. We have dogs eating people who are refusing to work. You can see the Spanish kind of laughing here behind them in their royal or fancy clothing. It's a horrible system, and most of these Spanish mines are going to be down here in what was the Inca Empire. And that's going to be, and we see a couple up here in the northern part of South America. Also in parts of like in Mexico, for example, we're going to see this system called the Encomienda system, where the Spanish are not only going to get pieces of land in the New World, in the Americas, but they're also going to get the labor of the people who live there. This is a short-lived forced labor system, but the plan was for the Spanish to care for and Christianize the Indians, to force them to convert. And really what the Spanish colonizers end up doing is they just force the natives to work on their land. And these natives are going to die from disease, harsh treatment, and these natives are eventually going to protest to the Spanish government that this system's unfair. And the Spanish actually get rid of this system after 40 years. But the forced labor is they're forced to work on the land for the Spanish. And after the system ends, what really emerges for most of the rest of the Spanish colonial period is the hacienda system. And the hacienda, this is an example of a hacienda. This is a huge plantation, large piece of land. And the workers who live on that land provide labor for the landowner, almost like a peasant system. So the natives would be working for this Spanish conquistador or this Spanish settler who has this large tract of land. And this is going to exist well into the 1800s, and some people would say this system still is really ingrained into a lot of Latin American culture today. Last kind of piece of this, we do see new racial hierarchies exist, and I just want to point out this one new one, which is new economic and political elites. In Spanish Latin America, we have this new social class structure, and hopefully you talked about this last year, but at the top of this culture, social class system are the peninsulares. They are people who are born in Spain, who moved to the Americas after they were born. You have Creoles. These are people who are Spanish descent, but were born in the Americas, so they are one step below. Below them, you have people of mixed ancestry, so people who have some Spanish blood and some Native American blood will be mestizos. The mulattoes are Spanish and African, and then at the bottom are Native Americans and people of African descent. If you are a peninsulare, you can run the government. You are the only group who can be in the government, so you have tremendous political power. You become the political elite. The Creoles, who have the same bloodline as you, they are full-blooded Spanish, but they were born in the Americas, cannot work in the government at all. They can only work for the military. So there's going to be a little dissension that arises between this peninsulare group and the Creole group, and the only difference between the two is where they are born. And that's going to come up later with the revolutions. Also, as people gain power, some emperors are going to start to gain power from all of this trade and all of this interaction. And nobles, for example, in Europe, which before had a tremendous amount of power in feudalism, are going to start losing power. Same thing with the daimyos in Japan. The shogun is going to start gaining power, and the nobles are going to start losing power as a result of all this trade. So we're seeing a lot of this movement in social hierarchies. And last but not least, we also see a difference in gender and family structuring. In West Africa, because we're losing 10 to 20 million people, and because many of those people are males, we're going to see females begin to outnumber males in West Africa. And one system that really comes into play and arises much more greatly as a result of the slave trade in West Africa is the promotion of polygamy, where one man in West Africa is expected and can marry multiple wives. And this is a way to kind of carry on the population, because there are so many more females to males, and they can't marry up in a monogamous relationship. They begin to go through a lot of polygamy, where you can marry multiple wives. So a lot of changes as a result of this. We'll kind of go over some more of this in detail. As always, if you have questions, write it down. There's a lot of information to process here. Feel free to run it and review it. And that's all I got. Have a good day.